But the more that we do it and the more that people get engaged, that's the starting point. It's not the solution yet, but this is part of the process to get there. I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've described this emergence of the physician, with the early years of social media into the public space as the public physician. And I've even described it as a moral responsibility to be part of the conversation about all the things you mentioned. Just here in Texas, we're experiencing a measles outbreak.
Hello, and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast features stories and wisdom from the best CMOs in healthcare. Today, our guest is Dr. Brian Vartabedian, Chief Medical Officer at Texas Children's Hospital in North Austin. Dr. V grew up in Boston and attended the University of Massachusetts and earned his medical degree from UMass as well. He went on to train in pediatrics and completed a GI fellowship, all at the Baylor College of Medicine. Brian, welcome to the show.
Lee, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So first, we have to establish your bona fides or bona fides, however it is pronounced, before we get too far into the show. And our listeners may not know that while UMass is located in Amherst, UMass Med School is located in Worcester. Is that right?
Yes. And if you're from Massachusetts, it's pronounced Worcester.
Worcester. Okay, yeah. All right, well, that's the litmus right there. So we know you're from Massachusetts, but I'm going to ask a much more important question, perhaps the most important question of the entire show. While you were at medical school, did you ever shop at Spags off Route 9 in Shrewsbury? Okay, so I know you're the real deal.
So this is like a trip down memory lane.
Will you have to describe Spags to our listeners. They don't know what we're talking about.
I don't even know how you describe Spags. It's sort of a catch-all store. It had everything, and all kinds of fun stuff. And maybe you have a better description, but it was a fun place to go and just walk around and find weird stuff.
Yeah, it was the original hodgepodge store of anything you never thought you needed, and you never walked out without buying something you never thought you needed. My brother moved to Central Massachusetts in 1988, and he's lived there ever since. And he took me there the very first time I visited, maybe around 89 or 90. And from that point on, I was addicted. I mean, I had to go to Spags every time I was in town until it closed, I don't know, about 20 years ago. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. This is a real, credible Central Mass guy with the accent, and he knows what Spags is. So,
yeah, exactly.
What was your original plan when you chose to attend medical school? What were you thinking about career-wise? What were you looking forward to? Talk about that time in your life.
Yeah, I think I went into medical school kind of dewy-eyed, like a lot of med students, I think, right? Didn't have a real clear idea of where I wanted to go after med school. I knew I loved working, I loved science, loved working with the human element, and that's what drew me in. Once I got there, I think in terms of specialties, I think flirted between psychiatry and pediatrics. And some of that broader stuff, I think, drew me in. And believe it or not, I wound up as a pediatric gastroenterologist, which, if you know anything about the field, is half psychiatry, I think. So it's kind of ironic that I wound up there. I think I originally wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist when I came to Baylor as an intern, and found it to be too specific and too anatomical. I needed something broader, so
I got you.
I got you. Gastro.
Everybody at some point, I think, flirts with the idea of being a cardiologist. I think that's just something we go through.
Yeah.
And then there's like a lot of reasons that pull us away. And I unfortunately know way too much about gastroenterology simply because I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease while I was in medical school, of all things.
Wow.
And my father was my only counselor at the time. My brother wasn't of any help off in central Massachusetts. And we didn't know anything. And so we just said, well, we're just going to do what the doctor tells us to do and continue in medical school. And so I'm a lifetime member of the Crohn's Club and happy to be proud that I've made it this far in life.
Yeah. Well, you've witnessed some amazing changes in the field as the advances in treatment have really benefited you, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely accurate and well stated, and for which I'm thankful every day for you and your colleagues and everybody who's been involved in inflammatory bowel disease. All right.
Yeah,
so
you mentioned the cardiologist thing. It everyone wants to be a cardiologist. It's kind of like everybody wants to be a fireman when they're a kid. I think it's kind of the same thing.
Well, we will come back to that. So hold that thought later on. So, all right. So you're flirting with these different ideas. You realize where you want to be, and you end up in Texas for your fellowship. Mm-hmm. And how did you over time shift from being an all-in clinician and a clinical teacher to arriving at the current position as chief medical officer? What were the events or the circumstances that brought you there?
Yeah, it's an interesting sequence, Lee, and I think it probably reveals some interesting elements or important elements for young physicians who want to emerge in leadership. To boil it down quickly, I went into private practice out of fellowship in Houston, believe it or not, because I really a job that I was facing in Akron, Ohio, at Akron Children's fell through last minute, so I had to open a practice in Houston.
So I have to interrupt because I grew up outside of Akron. So this story is just getting stranger and stranger. Okay, so
I know
that fell through, and keep going.
So Akron fell through, and so I turns out that there was a little company called Columbia Healthcare that was looking to build a competing children's hospital in Houston in 1996. So I left fellowship and went into direct competition with Texas Children's Baylor College of Medicine. And for, I think, 8 years had a target on my back because Dr. Feigen, who was a physician in chief at Texas Children's at the time, was determined to sort of see to it that this children's hospital kind of doesn't happen. Long story short, I created a killer practice. As Texas Children's realized they had to make this move beyond the Texas Medical Center, this big medical center, out into the community, Dr. Feigen called me and said, hey, would you be willing to come back and move into this community north of Houston called the Woodlands and set up a practice? And we talked. And so they acquired my practice and all my records and everything else, and began as the first full-time subspecialist for Texas Children's outside of the Texas Medical Center. What's important about that is in 2000 at that time, pediatric care, children's hospital, everything was really centered around the children's hospital. So if you had a sick kid, if you have a kid with Crohn's, you had to make the pilgrimage to the big children's hospital to get that care. But what we saw happening was hospitals started meeting parents where they're at out in the community. And so this was an effort to do that. So I helped shape that vision for Texas Children's Hospital. I created proof of concept for the demand for this kind of service in North Houston, and helped open Texas Children's North Austin, which is Texas Children's The Woodlands, which is a freestanding hospital in North Houston. Along the way, we opened Texas Children's West Campus. And so we had this model growing of expanding into the communities. And I think I helped shape that blueprint with the senior leadership, who were very centered on the traditional quaternary medical center approach to pediatrics. Then when Austin, the vision for Austin came, they said, could you help us lead that? And so here I am as a CMO in Austin.
Well, that in and of itself is a bit of a show for our history buffs about how in the 90s, there was this whole era of growth before we even began to think of vertical integration within healthcare, the expansion of, there was Med Partners, there was FICOR, there was a Texas company whose name I cannot remember. These were all physician practice management organizations that helped scale up practices, and they became competitive with hospitals and larger organizations. And it became this quickly buy, build, growth explosion. And your success as a private practitioner probably got their attention, that they're either going to grow with you or suffer without you. Is that a reasonable assessment?
No, that's absolutely right. I think they needed to make this expansion. They didn't have anyone with any kind of vision to help them. Everyone at Texas Children's were academic centered in this new concept of reaching out. So I kind of helped create a blueprint, quite literally. I remember creating documents, creating a vision for what could happen or what could be. And I think that was central. For listeners who want to emerge in leadership this way, you have to create the blueprint for people to follow. And when you give people a solution for their problem, that's when you get put into positions of leadership.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. In fact, in our academy, we talk about the holdback for physicians is they're great diagnosticians. They've been trained that way, but in growth and in administrative roles, you have to come with solutions. So clearly, you had a vision for your practice. You had a blueprint for an organizational enmeshment. What else did you do to prepare for leadership? Do you have advanced degrees? Did you take some extra training? Tell me about your leadership background.
Well, it's interesting, Lee, because I didn't go out anticipating or wanting to be a leader necessarily. I kind of fell into it. So to answer your question, initially, I didn't do any preparation in Houston. Now, when I took this step into Austin 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, holy crap, I'm going to be in this role that's more elevated than before, and I don't have any proper training in leadership. I don't have an MBA. There's all this insecurity about position leaders who don't have MBAs, which we can get into, but I don't have MBA. I did have an advanced degree in management. Fortunately, Texas Children's has a pretty robust program called the Catalyst Leadership Program, which they plugged me into, which is kind of not a crash course, but even it's a long-standing course that helps cultivate its leaders. And so that was a great thing that I did, reading Harvard Business Review cover to cover, even in the stuff that didn't interest me. So I really didn't have that anxiety about prepping to be a leader until I came to Austin, honestly.
Yeah. And again, back to the era where we're from a similar trajectory, it wasn't necessarily a requirement to have the business degree. But if you excelled in the ability to create a product, in your case, a private practice model, and I was in a multi-specialty group, people will pay attention to you, and then you get tapped on the shoulder. And that was what you and I probably like, hey, you're doing a fine job. Would you be willing to take this project on? And then the project turns into growth, which turns into success, and then you get a title with or without the degree. So
yes, exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. And honestly, a lot of leadership, well, at least I can speak for Texas Children's, the way physician leaders operate, it's really it's running operations. The running joke is they don't let us get near spreadsheets because we could do something dangerous. But we're, I don't want to say a little restricted in what we do as leaders, but anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah. And I've been through that, and I know many others who have as well. And physicians, some are extremely entrepreneurial, but many are not. And the idea of rapid change is just an enormous hill to climb, and having the structure. So I advise some of our young students in our class, if they're looking at leadership roles, go to a system where they already have, as you described at Texas Health, a program to educate within the culture of the organization to accelerate your leadership skills. And if you go to a system that doesn't have that, ask in your comp and benefits plan for coaching and mentoring so that you're not isolated, because these roles are isolating. and you need to have a structure, the same kind of structure as you talk about culture. It's much easier to start a culture than to shift it, but it's even harder for physicians because of our training and our background. All right, so let's move past this a little bit. I've followed you on LinkedIn, and over the past few years, you have created both a newsletter and recently a podcast that I believe is called Free Range MD. Is that right?
That's right, Free Range MD.
Tell us the origin of the content that you're providing and your podcast. Tell us about that.
So I began knowing that I wanted to have great conversations about medicine. As I see so much of what's happening in medicine becoming automated and driven by AI, I was just thinking to myself at this stage of my career, what is the core element of humanity in its conversations? And I really wanted to, just like we're having here, Lee, is just to talk. And I didn't quite know how to do that. And so talked to some friends who are big podcasters, and they said, listen, you just got to lean into it. You just have to start. And so I started the podcast maybe a month or two ago and have, I think, 3 episodes up. But I think it's going to take the direction of broad conversations about some of the bigger issues in medicine. I'd like it to appeal to a broader audience than just physicians. That's apparently the death knell of podcasts. You're supposed to be very niche-y with what you do. But believe it or not, my wife enjoys some of these episodes, so she's my litmus. And some of the folks that have coming up, authors and so on and so forth, I think will have interest to a broader audience than just physicians. Even though physicians, you will love it if you listen.
Well, I think that to add and to pile on, to begin larger conversations with larger audiences, and hopefully beyond the sharing of the noble vision of what medicine does for itself and for others, the conversation isn't wide enough to affect change. We see a lot of anger. We have seen outright violence with respect to the murder of a CEO of a major company. And yet the conversation, the discourse, the debate, the civility isn't occurring at a noise level to make an impact that I think all of us want to see. To the point about Crohn's, there have been incredible challenges and advances, and I'm a beneficiary of it, but it didn't come without an enormous structure. And now that structure is actually interfering with our ability to do the things that we all want, both as patients and as physicians. Do you agree with any of that?
I think so. I think categorically I do. Expand on that a little bit.
Well, I think that so while I've started a podcast, you have a podcast, and I've been watching some others that are getting their voices out into the public sphere. So for years, right, the physicians only talked to each other in the physician lounge, or yelled at the administrator on their way into the OR or into the endoscopy suite. And I'm not apologizing for the yelling. It just was the way it was. And the problem is physicians kept talking to each other and putting their heads down in the lounge. Well, now physicians are pushing out with their voices and saying, here's a problem, here's a solution. Here's a problem, here's a solution. And this is a brand new space for most of us. It's a very uncomfortable space for most of us. But the more that we do it and the more that people get engaged, that's the starting point. It's not the solution yet, but this is part of the process to get there. I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've described this emergence of the physician, with the early years of social media into the public space as the public physician. And I've even described it as a moral responsibility to be part of the conversation about all the things you mentioned, even the CEO of United and the assassination. Just here in Texas, we're experiencing a measles outbreak. So I've started putting together some shorts on my YouTube channel just to address some of the measles misinformation that appears to be spreading around our community. So using some of these platforms to reach the community, I think is key for us as physicians.
You may be, in fact, you are the first person that has framed that as a moral obligation, and I'm going to borrow that, and I will give you credit. And I want to use that to pivot towards the one article that really just cut to my heart. And it was entitled Transactional and Interactional Care. And I have a feeling when I read this, and we'll get into what it is that you wrote, that you had been thinking about this. You seem to be a contemplative, deep thinking man, and you thought about this for a while, and then you put pen to paper. And I wonder if you would be able to share to the audience what those two things mean and what prompted you to put that out there. Again, obligated or not, you put it out there. So talk to us about that.
So it's interesting. Opening the North Austin campus, one of the challenges we faced with hiring all these faculty members was kind of a lack of office space. We built this campus with the intention that doctors would be working and not sitting in offices like academicians do back in the medical center. The challenge came when people needed office spaces for certain things. And I started thinking about this concept of what doctors actually do. What does their work look like? And when you think about what doctors do when they interface with a patient, sometimes it can be transactional, which is where the endpoint of what we're doing is very, very well defined. Good example would be removing a button battery in a child, or removing an appendix, or taking out stitches. These are things, they have a very clear endpoint, and the way we do that defines the spaces we work in, what our clinics look like, and so forth. And then we have the concept of interactional care, where the endpoint isn't as quite well defined. It might be critical life conversations. It might be things that involve deeper discussion or deeper dialogue, where the end result or the endpoint isn't as perfectly described. And it's important because different doctors work in different ways. Our palliative care doctors don't do transactional care. They do interactional care. Our surgeons clearly do transactional work. And so I think it's thinking about how doctors work and what they do, and everything, of course, exists in shades of gray, because I do some of both. I do a lot of interactional discussion with a young family with a child with new diagnosis of Crohn's. But of course, taking out a button battery is pretty cut and dry. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I think it's important to understand a doctor's workspace and how it centers around the kind of work they do.
Well, thank you for dissecting that and explaining that. And I'm going to keep digging into it a little bit more. So I did palliative care for a number of years. I was one of the few doctors that I know of in my town that did house calls. So I had to map out, this was before Google Maps, right? Where do they live? What time can I approach them? Is it a safe environment for me and for the household, and so on and so forth? And at the end of the day, I got the same dollar amount if I chose to submit a claim for it as if I were in the exam room, which is not designed for the same conversation that I had inside the house with someone suffering from, say, end-stage multiple myeloma, who could not leave their house because of the degree of disability and pain and discomfort. So I entirely agree with you on that. But I want to get into where are we going in terms of doctoring, and I'll ask you your thoughts. We have this misalignment throughout all of healthcare right now. So what might we do to elevate interactional care and realign how we provide the compensation for that?
Okay, so Lee, there's a lot there. Let's talk about, let's just begin, I guess, with the future of doctoring. And I probably would submit to you that we don't know what a doctor will be doing in 20 years from now or 25 years from now. And this is a big problem because we don't know the skill set that doctors are going to need. So we don't know who to choose for medical school. I mean, there's a lot of speculation around this, but, and I will add too that as a profession, we need to be part of shaping what this looks like. We tend to be very deterministic around all this technology. We see our technology is deterministic. In other words, we say, oh, well, the technology is going to do this. And so as docs, we're going to show up and we're just going to have to do this because this is what the technology is doing. I think we need to have bigger role in shaping what that looks like. And that's a huge ask, and it requires a lot more than we're going to solve here today. But when I think about what work is going to be like going forward, I do feel that medicine in general, and we can take this to the bank, is going to become more and more reductive. Diagnosis is going to be based upon markers and genes, and it's going to be predictive and preemptive. We're already getting that way. And so I think there's this very technical element of medicine. And then there's the docent element. How do we help families navigate this space of super, super reductive gene-based, marker-based medicine? And then there's also the technical, non-invasive emergence of special technicians who do just amazing, miraculous things that we see even happening at our own hospital here. So you can imagine that there's these super technicians, that there's docents that help explain and navigate, and so I think things might emerge. The roles of physicians might emerge over time. So I don't know what the future of doctoring is, but I think it's going to look something like that.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm not attempting to put you on the spot, nor am I attempting to solve it. But I would wholeheartedly endorse your statement. Similar to the moral obligation of dispersing and cutting through the misinformation, putting real information into the community, whether it's measles or anything else. We have an obligation to think about what comes after us, what is doctoring, how do we sort out those different roles and responsibilities. And this is where I think chief medical officers have to be at the cutting edge of, you can hire lots of different doctors and APPs to do a lot of different work within this environment. Again, whether it's in the exam room, in the trauma bay, in the endo suite, you can do all of that work. But if you are not thinking about doctoring, you become a technocrat yourself. You get into the dollars per square foot and how many doctors see how many patients, and that is not where we need to be thinking. It may be fiscally prudent, but it may not be solving the bigger issue in any increment that we can achieve. So that's where my head is at on that.
The other thing I think about is what do we want to bring forward from the 20th century doctoring here into the new age? Or the question I like to ask is, what are the things that we do as doctors that we never want technology to ever touch? What piece of medicine do we want to remain slow? Where do we want to intentionally put in friction into medicine, and where does that friction belong? Speaking about transactions, I was listening to a CEO of a major healthcare system on a YouTube video the other day, and raises this question of why can't medicine be like ordering on Amazon, which is basically everything needs to be swipe right, swipe left in response to some belief that everyone wants everything to be like ordering dish soap. And I think we as physicians have to decide, where should the slow elements of medicine be? Where should the friction be? Do we want end-of-life discussions to really be moderated by chatbots? Obviously, no one wants that. No one's going to go there. But it's an extreme example of the thing that we never want technology to touch.
I totally agree with that. And I don't know if you can see over my shoulder, that book right there, it says Friction. This is
I love it.
Do you know this book?
I don't know the book, but I need to read it. But
I'm going to send you a copy. That's my gift to you for participating on the show. This book is that CEO may have heard about or read this book, where why isn't medicine practice like booking your flight on Delta Airlines on your phone or ordering off of Amazon? And actually, while you didn't say it, I'm going to guess that, sure, if I want my chest x-ray tomorrow at 6 a.m. before I have to get down to the clinic, as a customer of healthcare, you better believe I want that chest x-ray. That's a total commodity to me. I don't, don't give me this rigmarole. Now, on the other hand, if you're telling me that I have lung cancer, you're damn right I don't want a chat box. I don't want that. I want you to sit down, know who I am, what are my immediate concerns. Maybe it's my wife, maybe it's my kids, maybe it's I take care of my grandpa. I don't know. But there's no chat box that should be defining that moment in time when you're delivering serious news to a vulnerable person, and we have not dedicated enough time to. Now we can use avatars and AI to teach a medical student again and again and again how to deliver bad news. I am pretty confident that in medical school I saw it one time, and somebody said, "Now you go into the room for the next patient and tell them they have this problem." That's not adequate training when it comes to delivering bad news. So we could create simulated experiences where people get much better at the interaction, and then we figure out what is the right compensation model for that time and effort to do the right thing for that human being, taking the doctoring of the past and moving it into the future, and let all the commodity and the friction-free stuff, let that happen, but we'll stay out of it. We'll just stay
absolutely.
out
I want my getting my meds refilled, getting the results to my X-ray. Obviously, those are the things that we can treat like commodities. But the end of life discussion, off bounds, off limits.
Yep, totally. All right, so we're getting towards the end of this show here a little bit. I got to ask you a very personal question. What has been the hardest aspect for you personally of your titled job, your titled work as Chief Medical Officer?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lee. I mean, I think there are a lot of challenges, and my personal growth has been amazing over the past 3 or 4 years, moving into this role in this new challenging environment in Austin that we've talked about. The thing that was kind of unexpected for me as a leader or fitting into a leadership role like this was dealing with the intimate problems of the docs I work with, people who are having personal challenges in their lives, who will approach me and trust me for guidance and counsel on how they can navigate this problem within the context of Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor and all the other things. And so having that human element or that intimacy with these docs has been something that was a total surprise to me. And it's something that I love it. I love it on the one hand, just because of my nature, but it's been disarming at times. The trust that people put in me as a leader. And so that's probably the biggest thing.
Well, I thank you for sharing that. That is, I believe, highly complimentary, and I hope you take it as complimentary. Many physicians see those of us in executive roles as the Darth Vader of the health system. We're the dark side. We have the mask. We have the cloak. We are not to be approached. We're going to tell you what to do. And I as an oncologist, and I know you believe this when you're taking mucosal samples during an endo or what have you, the pathologist, we were told when we were students, right? The pathologist is the doctor's doctor. Yeah, well, I believe that the chief medical officer, first and foremost, is the doctor's doctor. Now, we may not always agree, and we may have responsibilities that push back onto doctors, and that's a difficult space for us to live in.
Yeah.
But if we can be seen as an ally, an asset, a trusted advisor, a confidant, a coach, a mentor, any of those titles, and they're all different, then we've done our job, because there are no other venues for the doctors to go to where they can have that. Look, I know what you went through in training. I wasn't a pediatric GI fellow, but I know what you went through, and I can relate to you. And my buddy, maybe my best friend that I play golf with, who's a non-clinical CEO, he or she, they didn't go through what we went through. And so we have an immediate rapport. So my hat is off to you, and I salute you for that. And I'm going to ask you one final question, and we may have touched on it a little bit. What do you think is the single biggest fire in healthcare right now? And what can a chief medical officer do about that, if anything at all?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue or the biggest fire maybe we're facing in healthcare, and to put into the context of the show, is burnout by physicians. And I think it is by definition what we would call a wicked problem. Everyone thinks they have a solution: get rid of the EHRs, give us yoga mats, what have you. But it's a very complicated problem that represents a number of downstream effects that are happening in medicine. And so I think as chief medical officers, maintaining that interface between administration and the physician is key. My number one priority right now is physician retention. I think it's everyone's challenge right now as a CMO, and how I do that and how I manage that requires a whole lot of EI and creativity and foresight. And so that's the biggest fire I'm facing, and I think something we'll be facing going forward.
Yeah, no. And I think it fits into the bucket of the moral obligation of the physician leader, dispelling bad information, looking out for physicians, helping them through their just terrible, dark times that they're going through, some of which are of no fault of theirs or of ours. And I think you nailed it. And just like, and you clearly nailed the fact, again, that you're from Massachusetts by using the word wicked. Like I haven't heard that in a while. So, and
right.
Back to the notion that every kid wants to be a fireman. So here's the deal. So being a chief medical officer is no small task, and it takes a lot of intentional preparation, and much of it feels like a trial by fire. And in fact, my old boss told me that it's just like a career in firefighting. You start by going to firefighting school, you train, you drill until someone says you're ready to fight the fire, and you put on the uniform and you walk out the door and you're a fireman. And then one day you're being called squad leader or captain. Somebody taps you on the shoulder, and one day maybe you're the fire chief. And my boss always told me you cannot be a fire chief without first becoming a firefighter. What do you say to that?
No, absolutely. I will add that I have a lot of friends in industry as CMOs in startups, and they've left clinical medicine, and their job in that organization or that corporation is to really understand what's happening in medicine. It's changing so quickly. You have to continue to have your hands on what's going on, and I would strongly recommend it, no matter what level you reach as a young leader, that you remain to the ground level, seeing patients so that you can understand what's happening in your organization and respond appropriately.
Yeah, agree. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, Brian. I appreciate it.
It was a great conversation, Lee. It took some unusual angles and turns, and it was really a lot of fun.
Well, that's what we do here. And you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the CMO. Want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO? Want to be on the show? Email me at leescheinbart@gmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also listen to the podcast on Apple, and you can also watch the videos of the shows on YouTube. Our show's website is thefirechief.podbean.com. I love talking with CMOs from all over the United States, obviously, so please connect, leave your reviews and your comments, and check out Dr. Vartabedian's new podcast. And again, the name of that podcast is?
Free Range MD.
Free Range MD. Check it out. Leave your reviews for him. Share all of our work with your local folks and your colleagues throughout the United States. And remember this, in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.
Thanks, Lee.